This presentation is about gathering firewood, particularly in a time when you can't buy or sell. To do that, we're going to talk about modern ways of doing firewood when you have power equipment and things like that and are able to get fuel. And then we're going to talk about the methods that are common 100 years ago when you did it the hard way. So this is broken up into two segments: the typical firewood collection method and creating firewood without power equipment, and different types of wood for fire, seasoning of wood, and starting fires in your stove. So why firewood at all? Well, first of all, it's a great source for heat. You can heat your home. You can add ambiance and comfort. The radiant heat from a wood stove is very comforting, much more noticeably than central air furnaces. You can also heat hot water. So if you are in a situation where you don't have power, for instance, you can generate hot water by putting your containers on top of the wood stove. You can also cook on the wood stove. And if you have a cooking stove, you can even bake. I'm told that baked bread out of a kitchen wood stove's oven is phenomenal. So here is a antique looking, but probably not antique, kitchen wood stove. And you can see it has an oven on the right and the firebox on the left. And this particular stove has a warming, it's called a bread warmer. That portion above, the door opens and you can put items up there to keep them warm while the stove is going. You can also use a stove to dry things for dehydrating, and we have a whole segment on drying food and dehydrating at preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com, which is one of our previous presentations. So let's take a look at the different types of wood stoves. This is your typical heating wood stove. Our first country home, we had a Blaze King wood stove that looked similar to this, and it really worked good. It was airtight, and we were able to heat our home. It was our primary source of heat, and we were able to heat our home and have the fire last all night. At one occasion, we still had the ability to start a fire without a match 21 hours after the initial fire. So a good modern airtight wood stove is great. You could also have a furnace. We have a neighbor who has a unit similar to this. His is a little bigger. His is a wood furnace and an oil furnace. So he can load his firewood in the furnace, and then so he doesn't have to bother with kindling and all that. He starts the fire with the oil furnace portion, and once the wood catches, he shuts the oil off, which is pretty clever. He has one other thing that's pretty unique, and that is the side of the unit. If this were the unit, the side that's against the wall is actually a fireplace in the living room. So you can open a metal partition and turn it into an actual fireplace in your living room. And then, of course, there's the kitchen wood stoves. In this particular model, this is a small one that does not have an oven, but it is a wood-burning stove with the bread warmer up above and all of that. And this model is a flame view, and you can see through the glass in the door, just like the wood stove that I showed you earlier. The larger version of this would have the oven as well. Here's the larger version of the same brand of stove. This is a flame view stove. You can see the bread warmer at the top. That silver area is all cooking potential area, varying temperatures depending where it is. The glass door in this particular model is on the left, and so you'd be able to see the fire from whatever room there is to the left there. And then the central portion is the oven, nice size oven, and then the portion on the right, which is an option, is a water tank that holds probably, I don't know, 7 or 15 gallons, I think. And you can access that water by opening the door in the front, and there's a faucet for hot water, or you can take your stove handle utensil and lift the lid open and take a ladle and get hot water out of it. So this is quite an all-purpose stove, and it's capable of heating the house. And so if you had this model, you could heat your house and cook and make hot water and warm and not have to have an additional stove for heat. So let's talk about the types of firewood cutting equipment. First of all, your favorite tool in firewood collecting is the chainsaw, and that allows you to cut the logs into blocks. And then if you want to do it the easier way, you have a gas-powered log splitter. That makes quick work of splitting the logs instead of swinging an axe. In this particular model here, they have the log splitter oriented horizontally, so you would lift the block up and set it there and pull the lever and it would split it. You can also take that log splitter portion and swing it up vertical, and then you would be able to roll the larger blocks without having to lift them. So it's a two-directional unit. The question is, what about when you can't buy or sell? And at first I thought, well, the chainsaw is out of the question and the log splitter is out of the question, because if you can't buy or sell, you won't be able to get fuel. And the problem with gasoline, of which the log splitter runs on gas and the chainsaw runs on gas and oil mixed. So in either case, you are using mostly, if not all, gasoline. And the problem is gasoline doesn't last very long before starting to go bad. So one option is they make some additive that will help to extend the life of gasoline. But it still is going to maybe only be good for a year or maybe two. Then I was told about this. True fuel is something that apparently you can usually buy in a chainsaw logging kind of a store. That is the case in our town. And True Fuel is, you can buy it for 2-cycle or 4-cycle for both of those applications. And this fuel, as I understand it, is in a sealed container, and that you can make it last a long time. As you can see from their advertisement for True Fuel, it's ready to use. It's not cheap, but it will last 2 years opened and 5 years unopened. So if you foresaw a time when you wouldn't be able to buy or sell, one option would be to purchase ahead of time a stockpile of this type of fuel for your chainsaws and your log splitter. It's ethanol free, it's high octane, it'll never separate, etc. So if you don't have the power equipment available, you can do like these people and do everything by hand. I have reason to believe they built this cabin by hand, they split their wood, they cook, and all of that by hand. So how do you get the tree to the ground? Well, first of all, you can cut the tree down with an axe. It's a lot of work, and you end up with a lot of chips on the ground that could have been usable. But you would want to take an axe and probably cut a relief cut to make the tree fall in the direction that it's supposed to go. But then you might want to use one of these. This is a crosscut saw. These are the kinds of saws that were used 100 years ago, and loggers used them to cut these huge trees that you see around where we live. Two guys on one of these things, and they'd cut a tree that was 6 foot in diameter. So it can do the job. I've never used one. I have friends that have, and they say if they are properly set up and sharp, they actually are quite surprisingly easy to use. The key is to have it properly sharpened and aligned. If it isn't, then it earns the name that it is often known by, and that is a misery whip. So if it's not sharpened properly, it can be miserable. Here's a picture of two guys cutting with one of those saws. They took an axe and got the bark out of the way, and then they're cutting back and forth like that. Looks like it's even a guy and a gal. I think there's a lady on the right-hand side. Then there are variations of this, smaller ones for the downed trees. And here's a close look at how the teeth are. There are different kinds of teeth, and I couldn't tell you for sure the purpose of each type, but there obviously are a variety here, as you can see. This man here is famous for restoring crosscut saws, and this is him in his shop working on one of them. And I understand that he is no longer taking new customers, but he's a pro at this. Here and it takes a professional about a couple of days to do it, apparently. One option is if you had an old saw that some old timer gave you, or you bought in a antique store or something. Those are very good saws, the old ones, and you could buy a reconditioning kit for it, and then this particular kit comes with instructions of how to do it, and so that would be an option. The other option is you can buy a new one. I searched the internet and found a couple of sources, and one of them was in the United States and one of them was England. So that would give me more confidence than some knockoff from China. Then there are hand tools, splitting hand tools. The four main tools that a person might want from left to right is a splitting maul, is the one on the left. It looks like an axe, but it has a hammerhead on one side. And then a wedge, that's the one that's in the middle. And then the axe is the one on the right. That's a single-headed axe. And then a hammer. So the splitting maul is about 6 to 8 pounds, and it'll do the trick most of the time all by itself. The axe works really well for smaller jobs and for drier pieces of wood. The wedge is a great tool for helping to split a piece of wood that would otherwise be extremely difficult to do. For instance, maple wood can be really hard to split by hand. But if you've got wood that splits easy, you just use the splitting maul and swing it like an axe and it'll just split them. But if you have a hard time with it, you take the wedge and then you take the hammer and it'll force it in. So you use the hammer to help the wedge start into a piece of wood. Sometimes the splitting maul is just too cumbersome and clunky. So here we have the wedge in a piece of wood, and they hit it with the maul. The other thing is a hatchet. That's a smaller version of an axe, and that's good for making kindling and things like that. And Andrew will talk to you about storing firewood, but here's a picture just to get you going of somebody who did a very nice job with a shed to store the firewood. You will notice that the sides are not solid, but allow the air to travel through. Now we will tell you about wood types, seasoning, and starting a fire in your stove.
Firewood, selection, storage, and starting the fire. Selecting firewood, you're going to look at various characteristics of the firewood. How much energy is it going to provide, or BTUs? Is it smoky? Does it have a lot of sparks? Depending on your application, those will be important characteristics. Ease of splitting, that's going to depend on whether you're hand splitting it or mechanically splitting it. Coaling, if you're having to bank your fire to hold your fire overnight, or cooking with it. Aroma, not too significant of a factor, but something you may consider. And then the dry cord weight, which is most important when you're having to transport it from the pile to the stove. A cord of wood is defined as a stack of wood 8 feet long by 4 feet wide by 4 feet tall. And this particular stack is not cut into firewood as in stove wood. It's more like boiler wood for like an external boiler that would take larger log sizes, but it gives you an idea of the size of a stack of wood. The art of stacking wood is one that is learned over time. You can see that this particular individual has done the crisscross method on the ends to stabilize the stacks in the center, and it's up off the ground on pallets. This is an important way to keep it from ground contact and rotting. We've had wood stacks fall over. They just kind of get to leaning if they're not straight, and notice that this was also stacked away from the house a little bit, so it's not right up against the house. That's a good idea. It's also springtime, which is a good time to do your wood. You can see the lilacs in the background there. That way it can have the summer to cure and be well cured when it's time to use it. Where do you get your wood? You can purchase it already cut and split and seasoned. That's what we had to do our first season because we didn't have firewood put away the first year we got our stove. About $350 a cord or per 2-cord load, and depending on where you are. You can get unseasoned wood as well, but that would require seasoning before you would want to use it for your fireplace or stove. The way we ended up doing it the second year was we got a load of logs. I think we did this at least 2 years. You can get 4 to 8 cord per load of logs, depending on your log size or load size. This ours was a short load. This looks like a long load. With this, you do the cutting, you do the splitting. So you need to have those things in place. Over time then, you'll be able to probably find logs or wood available in other ways. So friends and neighbors, just keep an eye out for trees that are taken down. People in urban areas may not have a use for the wood and need a place for it to go. Never hurts to ask. Free wood can have a variety of different characteristics. It can be really good, or it can be punky and rotten, or green. You'll definitely probably need to season it before use. But you can be selective even on free wood. Every location has its own firewood, and different woods lend themselves to different uses. So hardwoods are typically best for firewood. Ash, red and white oak, beech, birch, hickory, hard maple, pecan, dogwood. These particular ones all are very high in heat capacity, easy to split and burn, no smoke or not heavy smoke, and it doesn't pop and spark, and a very excellent rating. But these aren't available in every locality. This table here is taken from The Country Way, a book by Dr. Lloyd Amy, and has it outlined here in hardwood and softwood characteristics, and it covers many of the different woods found across the United States. in different areas. So just choose the woods that are closest to what you have available. One of the worst woods you can choose is cottonwood. Cottonwood, while having big trees, does not really dry out very well at all, and has very poor coaling, just lots and lots of ash. So it's just a poor wood choice. Just only burn in the direst of circumstances. The cedars, we have lots of cedars in the Pacific Northwest, good for kindling, but not so much for burning. But once again, you'll probably use what's abundant and available for you. Lots of tables available on the internet. This has another one that gives the heat capacity per different type of wood, and then how much it weighs dry and wet. But you can find and rate the woods that are available to you in your area. In the Pacific Northwest, some local favorites are red alder. It needs complete seasoning, otherwise it has lots of creosote if burned when wet, although alder has the notoriety of being able to burn when wet, but best if cured. You don't want to burn it wet because it'll have lots of creosote. It does split easily, so that's definitely a plus for alder. Big leaf maple is another super favorite, very excellent, but it's tough to split. So you need to have a mechanical split or lots of energy and wedges. Birch is not abundant but available. It's a very good wood for fireplaces. Cedar is also very abundant but better for kindling, not a great firewood. Douglas fir and hemlock are also used by some folks just due to availability, and it makes a decent firewood too. Again, whatever you happen to have as a local abundant and favorite wood is typically what you'll end up using. Seasoning. New wood is about 50% water, so it's very smoky because there's lots of steam being given off as it burns. This tends to accelerate creosote buildup. You want to make sure that your wood is seasoned to 20% or less of water. It can take up to a year to do that. You can use a hydrometer. This two-pronged probe device here is an example of a hydrometer. This wood here suggests it's about 14%, which may be due to the fact that there's a gap between the two boards that are laying there. You'd want to have those two probes on continuous pieces of wood. Seasoned wood not only lights easier, but it burns with less smoke, easier to transport, and less creosote is built up. Every year you want to maintain your chimney whether or not you use dry and seasoned wood or wet wood. Definitely don't want to use wet wood. But you can see these guys on the diagram using a chain flail device that you see in the lower left, spinning around and going up and down the chimney. Make sure you have your drape on the inside or have your stove closed so that you don't get ash inside. If you have a bend in your stovepipe, make sure that you do all the different aspects of your stovepipe to get it good and clean. The creosote before and after here, you can see in the flue or the chimney pipe. It's actually a scaly buildup that's brittle and knocks off easily. I used to think it was rather a tarry substance like the creosote from creosote bushes in the desert that are used to preserve railroad ties, but it's not that same kind of thing. Same name, different substance. Stacking wood to cure. The crisscross method on the upper left is the preferred way out in the open in the sun so the breeze can get to it up off the ground. Mrs. Amy, the wife of the author of the book The Country Way, did a two-stacking routine the entire time that they did wood-fired heating in their home, which has been until recently, and they're in their 90s. And they would do the crisscross method out to get it cured, and then bring it in to do the lateral stacking method you see in the upper right to stack it for use during the season. You can see the T-stakes on either end to support the stack and having it up off the ground on pallets to keep it so it can not rot away. Once you've got it seasoned, you want to store it under cover, preferably in a shed, but it can be in a stack that's properly organized to shed the water. Typically, stored wood that's been cured can last 3 to 4 years, but unless it's really covered well, it's going to degrade away over time. A couple layers of tin, top and bottom, can also function. as well as tarping. You can see the tarp on this one here is over wood that has not been split, which is a negative for this particular wood pile because it will not cure as well if it's whole rather than split. So once you get over the smaller logs that are on the ends there, you're not going to want to split those real small ones, but the larger ones you definitely want to split in order to get it cured well. So starting a fire on your stove, the first step is to set the fire, that is to get it in place before you actually light it. Start with your paper and cardboard and then kindling. You see the diagram with your small cordwood on top. You don't want to stack it full of larger cordwood until you get a good fire going. Otherwise, if it doesn't ignite to start with, it's just a hassle to get that out of the way. So make sure you have a good hot fire going. A small hot fire will also get the draft going in the right direction, the heat going and going up and out of your stove. A cold stove will tend to send the smoke back into your house, which is undesirable. The second step is make sure that you have your ventilation completely open. You have a closed damper on the left and an open one on the right. You definitely want that open so that your air can flow out of your chimney. Typically, your fire will draw air from the room, and or if you have a vent from the crawl space, that's preferable in a stove situation to pull it from the crawl space. That way you're not pulling warm air from the room to heat your fire. So you want to make sure that you have good airflow out the chimney. So your damper on the stove on the left, you can see the little T-handle there halfway up the stovepipe. On the cook stove here, you can see there's a kind of an L-shaped lever that's come down over the steel pot on the stove there. That's the damper on this one. So you want to make sure that that damper is open, and that's what's going to actually control your airflow once you get your fire started. It'll burn hotter with a full airflow and burn quicker, and you can slow it down by restricting the airflow. You want to make sure that you have that good airflow because you can have the smoke come back out into your room if you don't have good draft up out of your chimney when you start your fire. One way to do that is to poke some paper up the chimney or up the flue if possible to get maximum heat heading up and get it going in the right direction. Sometimes you can have restricted airflow due to creosote in the cap. You can see this is an occluded cap here, and we've had this happen mid-season sometimes. You have to just get up and knock the creosote off that so that it can burn freely and have airflow up out of the chimney. So a small hot fire will help to switch the direction of airflow from heavy air, cold air sinking down to actually having the warm air rising out. Keep the stove ash cleared out, also aids the draft and making sure that the creosote is clear. The third step is lighting the fire. So you can use matches or butane lighter. You never want to use gas or kerosene or anything like that to quick start your fire. It can have disastrous consequences if you do that. Never want to burn plastic or any other kind of petroleum-based product in your stove. You can use fire starters, which are like fuzz sticks or little bricks that have paraffin or something added to it. You can even make homemade ones from lint and paraffin that will, like a candle, aid your fire starting if you don't have newspaper or other fire starting aids readily available. But starting a fire is a fun experience and is the way to get things going. So then enjoy your stove, the nice ambiance of a fire, whether a fireplace or a stove. Many stoves have a window that you can see the fire. It does have ash that can build up on the window. And the best way to do that is either run a hot fire that'll burn the ash off, or just take a newspaper on a cold fire and put it in ash and just scrub it with the ash on the glass front, and that helps to clean the glass from the soot that builds up on it. But a good hot fire will do that as well. So you regulate the airflow to regulate the heat output. The more open the damper is, the hotter the fire. You can vary that for the intensity of your fire. If you want to do it overnight, have your fire burn overnight, you need to have a good tight stove, and then just fill your firebox full, make sure it catches well, and then dampen it down so it can burn slowly through the night. You don't want to totally damp it down because then it'll smolder and not have coals available. So depending on the stove tightness, you can actually have your fire and coal bed stay intact over 12 hours, which is very nice, rather than having to get up in the night to restoke your fire in order to maintain the fire through the night. So keeping your coals alive till morning and by banking a fire yields a colder house, but also makes certainly you don't have to use a match too. So you don't want to completely close the damper because smoldering creates creosote buildup much more rapidly. So if you're going to do a banking of your fire, either when you're leaving or before you head off to bed, let the fire burn down the coals and then rake together into a pile all those coals, and put several pieces of small wood onto the fire, and then cover with more coals and ash, and mostly close the damper. You want to leave it open a little bit. So you're going to have a covered little fire that's burning inside of a little ash coal mound that in the morning you'll open the damper all the way up, get a good dose of air flowing in there, open your door, rake off the ash and find the coals, pull them towards the front of your stove, and then set your fire behind it, and then add the coals to it to ignite your fire. That's going to have your stove still warm, so the general trend of the air is still up and out of your stove, which is a good thing because you don't want to have that smoke coming back down into your room. So either having a good tight stove that burns through the night, or banking your fire. Banking your fire will result in a colder house because it's not actually burning hot through the night, but it will make your fire starting in the morning easier than having to reset your fire all over again. So here's a diagram of that banking. In the evening, let the coals burn down. Put your coals underneath an ash pile with some wood, some small wood in it to kind of burn underneath the ashes. In the morning, rake those coals to the forward, and then set your new fire behind it over top of the coals, and then let it ignite and burn. Fires are a great way to heat a home. Some stoves have the glass, which can be either cleaned by newspaper and ash, just scrubbing it when the stove is cold, or just a good hot fire will clear that as well. You can also get a nice warm fire from one that is closed and doesn't have a glass front to it. And either way, the warmth from a stove or a fireplace, particularly a stove, is just a radiant, warm, deep heat that is most desirable.